Hello and welcome to Gunner Shot once again. Right. Today we're going to take on a very interesting topic. We'll, in our peak in everyday China, we'll talk of the demographic bomb. Fundamentally, China is getting old and the young people are not coming in. Right. It's a very interesting topic on which I've carried out a lot of research and let me see how interesting I can make it. The first thing which came about was the New York Times earlier this month, where it was very clearly reported that the Chinese population has fallen and it heralds a demographic crisis. Well, the fact is that the demographic crisis was not unexpected. It was long expected, but it was not expected to come up till the 2030 or somewhere around that time. Okay, but it was preponed by 10 years almost. That's the thing which makes this interesting. And then someone will ask, look, Japan, South Korea, Russia, and Italy all have had demographic declines. What's special about China, right? Uh, when you say the population falls, the deaths have outnumbered the births. There are many issues to this. There are many stories to this, and there are many flips to this whole story. But let me put it across to you based on what I have researched and what today the Chinese sources are saying. Okay, this was confirmed. The fall was confirmed by South China Morning Post also, almost on the same day, when it said that China population 2022 marks the first decline in 60 years from Mao's days. Interesting. But what I'd like to put across to you is there's not something which was not unknown. In my research in 2021, I had written an article, and this is important. I would like to read it out, and then we'll correlate what I had then said in 21 to what's happening today. China's population is shrinking and aging faster than any country in the history of mankind. Now, a demographic transition which took 126 years in France, 46 years in the UK, 40 years in Germany, and 24 years in Japan is happening in 21 years in China. Okay. China's one child policy has confined it or consigned it to a declining population irreversibly. Their fertility levels are below replacement rates. The country has aged. China's working age population has already declined by almost 40 million since a peak in 2015. The result, fewer workers, costlier workforce, fewer custom consumers, more dependence, reduction in the overall number of youth. The result, China is growing old before growing rich. This phenomenon has economic, political, social, technological development and other penalties. So far, China has risen with a demographic tailwind in the past 2 decades. Now, historically, nations with a shrinking population have not risen to be great powers. The oncoming demographic headwind portends a decline. China's rise has peaked as per South China Morning Post, National Interest, Nikkei Asia, and Bloomberg, to name a few platforms. Others have also put it across. To sum up this aspect, China knew about this albatross, did nothing much about reversing the effect as it did in implementing it. Now it can do nothing about it. That's the interesting part. Right. Having read this, the Chinese population has peaked, right? It has already started reducing, and this is the graph. As per this, by the end of the century, the Chinese population would well be just about half of what it is today. There's a slightly interesting graph, so I'll show it full scale. The black one is the working age population, which is decreasing continually over the century. The red lines are the 65 plus population. If you see the two arrows, the first arrow is of 2022, the next arrow is 2035. In 12 years, you'll see a marked decline in the working age population and a marked increase in 65 plus population. Very clearly, the working population of China is decreasing very, very fast. That's the point. I mean, this cartoon captures it all. Old age going up, youngsters coming down. Now, this is what I had said 40 million was the estimate in 2021. Today, it's confirmed. China's population workforce will drop by 25 million over the next 5 years as demographic pressure grows. That's quite an important thing, right? And look, all these are now South China Morning Post news, and they would not attempt to put something out which doesn't have some official, you know, underscoring, right? The next headline says China's population crisis, the country might grow old before it grows rich. What exactly I had used 2 years back, and of course, this is a oft used phrase when you talk of Chinese demographics. Okay, well, let me take you back a bit. China's one child policy, what was it and what did it impact? This is again old article of 2021 of South China Morning Post. It started in 1980, the one child policy, and it was strictly enforced with punishments, including fines for violators and often forced abortions. China officially ended its one child policy in 2016. And in 2021, it has introduced a three child policy. I mean, this is great, but let's see how effective it is. That's the, you know, proof. Well, what is the effect of this one child policy? There's a phenomenon called 1 plus 2 plus 4. That means one child born today in China has to support his parents, who are also single children of their grandparents. The three generations of single children in uh, China. Can you imagine a country which doesn't have brothers and sisters, or very few of them, only cousins? Right? Now, this single child has to, at some point of time, has to support his parents and has to support his grandparents also. We've got economic implications. With the same amount what he earns, he has to support six more people. This is the third generation which is going to go through this. Okay, and of course, it's got an effect on not having enough recruit for the armed forces. For every guy who wants to join the armed forces, there are six people in the family who are dependent on him who say, don't go. So that is where the quality of the Chinese manpower in the military is suspect. Okay, let's see. Why is the population declining? Because marriage is on the rocks in China as women rethink their options and COVID 19 limits take their toll. So no one wanted to get married in this period. Suddenly the whole thing has come crashing down. Right? And it's not going to reverse. Okay. The next thing, this is again a very interesting thing of the one child policy. Now, China is home to 30 million men in search of brides. This is what the census showed. Okay, let's look at it a little deeper. Why? When they had the one child policy, they went through some abortions, selective sex specific abortions. So they have a problem. There were also cases of female infanticide reported in China at that time. So, as a result, there's a gender skew. If there's a gender skew, obviously the population will start going. This is what Pew Research says, this graph. China has had more male than female births, but its skewed sex ratio is projected to change. Whether it is skewed or not is a different policy. If you see the graph, it says in 2016 they had this two-child policy, the population continued to drop. 2021 they've come out with a three-child policy and it is still continuing to drop. Like I said, when the fertility rate reduces below 1.2, which is the normal replacement rate, the fall is irreversible. Okay, why has this fertility rate reduced? One is not enough marriages. Then the woman, their aspirations, education, jobs, then the social conditions. Okay, they can't afford babies, right? This is a cartoon, one of the Chinese cartoons. So there are no babies, people are not getting married, uh, women have become independent, there are more men. And more men, I mean, it reminds me, I think from Pakistan they get say donkeys is one of their imports, and brides. There's a bride smuggling racket going on between China and Pakistan. Right. The beauty. This is the beauty. I mean, we talk of many things. Look at the Chinese idiocy. I can't call it really anything else, really. Okay. This report is of 2020. Okay. In 2019, Chinese officials were still inflating the nation's birth and rate and population. There, the fall was known. Okay. So they were manipulating the figures already. Instead of trying to rectify the situation, they were manipulating. Okay. Right. Another very interesting thing. China's two-child policy under fire as parents' bank accounts frozen for having a third child. Okay. While they ease the policy for of 1 to 2 child, a third child should have been welcome because it boosts the thing. They were struggling to implement the two-child policy, but any couple who had the third child lost all the benefits of the second child. Okay, even 2019. This is as late as 2019. 2016 they scrapped the policy, and they knew it. There's a World Bank and joint World Bank study between the World Bank and China in 2012 when Xi Jinping came to power. Even that said, your population has to be controlled. The population decline was first detected around the turn of the century. And Mr. Xi Jinping was given this on a platter. That study is illuminating. Do something. They did nothing. Even now they're doing nothing. Now it's of course beyond their control. Okay, the alarm bells started ringing in 2021. In 13 provinces, the population officially shrank. Then they came with this three-child policy. Reaction, typical communist reaction. Okay, or a political reaction. Call it what you want. Okay, but then Chinese couples still reluctant to have 3 children despite policy shift, survey shows. Now, the parents have listed the heavy economic burden of child rearing, insufficient time and energy, and work pressure as the main obstacles to having a third child. In fact, some of them went off around to the extent of saying, "Look, you want to have us to have a third child?" They told the Communist Party people, "You lead the way by having a third child in your family." Right? And they made this call on their local internet or whatever social media to their Communist Party leaders. That was quite hilarious. Right. In 2022, in the two sessions meet, right, they spoke of AI to increase their population. They spoke of tax cuts and all that nonsense. I mean, just imagine they didn't use their normal intelligence to make sure babies are born. They wanted to use artificial, intelligence to increase the population. I don't know whether it was the case of artificial intelligence or artificial insemination. AI, what it meant in this, I don't know, but then that's the way the Chinese are. So it drives a lesson. They knew this problem, they neglected it. Suddenly they're scrambling. Now they want to use all kinds of technology. But look, human reproduction doesn't need technology, it needs common intelligence, not artificial intelligence in any case. Then there's another issue which is very important: aging population. When people age, the requirements change. I am old. I I need social security, pension. I need medical. If these two are there, I'm through. Okay, I can't consume. I'm not going to go and buy a Bosch refrigerator or a Maserati. I'll do the normal things. But in China, as people are getting old, as of today, there are about 25%, anything between about 18 to 20% who are above 65. It's going to go up. Now, these chaps don't have a pension, most of them. Okay. And they don't have a social security net. And they don't have medical facilities. The lack of Chinese medical facilities has been absolutely well exposed in the COVID. There's no doubt. So, what does China do with its working, with its aging force? A very important thing. So, their shape of their economy is going to change. So, if one hand they don't have children, on the other hand their working age population is reducing. On the third hand, if there is one, people are getting old, and the requirements are changing. The working age population, as the workforce reduces, their buying capacity reduces, and their responsibility increases. This is a $1 million question because it's going to haunt them in the economy, which I'll talk about in one of the later peeks into China. Okay, now that's what they say. Population fall calls for restructuring of China economy now. They have to do it. If they don't restructure their economy, they're going to go into pain. Some part of restructuring is forced by COVID and decoupling and international headwinds they're facing. But is China going this way? I'll talk about it in another different episode. Okay. They say that China's shrinking working age population will send ripples through global economy. Bustle here and there. There is India, Bangladesh, Vietnam. They're all younger countries. So there will be some ripples, but it will be absorbed. But China is going to have a problem. Okay. China can learn to live with a shrinking population, but it can't stop the trend. Again, let me do a zoom into this. This is published last year. Just even before the official announcement came of a shrinking population, of a population which had started declining. They're very clear that this trend is irreversible. Okay, right? And they have to live with it. And this is one of the latest articles. It came 2 days back. China's population faces endless period of decline with demographic shift far from finished. It's one of their own articles. There are articles which, we'll handle it. But that's communist bluster. How they will handle it is anybody's guess. In fact, I don't think they can handle it. Okay, you have to understand why I'm talking of this demography and all that, where not many people have spoken of this. In fact, an expert on China who stayed in China, did you know discuss this issue in a conference. He did highlight the fact that China's population is decreasing, and he made it a point to explain how China is managing this whole problem so well, and it's irrelevant in their rise. Not long back, 1 year back. At that time, I said, "Look, there's a major problem." He said, "Oh yeah, well." He just coughed at me. I said, "Okay, fine, let it come through." And now it's come through. Look, you have to go back into history to understand the Chinese politics, their structure. China has gone through 4 cycles under communism, which have consigned China to decline. Now, let me explain this. I'm making a heavy statement. The first cycle, and the first cycle had 2 phases. One was the Great Leap Forward. There's a cartoon of the old times. In the Great Leap Forward, people died out of hunger. Millions died out of hunger. Okay, and the country just collapsed. And then Mao came up with towards the end with the Cultural Revolution. It's a Frankenstein's monster. Everyone knows it. And this cartoon shows by Rebel Topper shows that there is a perception that Xi Jinping is getting back to the cultural revolution times. The Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap consigned China to a level which was abysmal. Okay, everyone thinks Deng Xiaoping is the modern architect of modern China, and it grew. But Deng Xiaoping started this one-child policy. Okay, under Deng Xiaoping, the one-child policy came through, and ever since the turn of the century, everyone knew that China's decline is clear. There were no two doubts about it. Okay, and here comes Xi Jinping, who's got everything with his coronavirus, has put under zero COVID. He thought he was in control, gone out of control. Again, he'll do whatever he has to stay in power. But the slide China is facing can't be reversed. And now I'm not going to talk about just the population decline. You have to connect it up with other things. Oh, look at this. At this point of time, China is having a problem with COVID decoupling, which is happening. The real estate is under crisis, and their infrastructure is in a problem. Their economy is in a problem. What is and this problems, all these problems, in my estimate, will go on for the next 4-5 years. Right? China is going to struggle for the next 4-5 years since economy is going to decline marginally. And in all this, there's a tech war which has started off with the CHIPS Act by the USA. Now USA has taken EU also along with it. And on the right is the trust. There's a trust deficit with China which is going to last for a long time, especially with Xi Jinping in power. The last peak of everyday China, I spoke of the international headwinds which China is facing. In between this, they have to restructure this economy. And I'm not going to talk about restructuring this economy. It's got its own pitfalls. I'll talk of it in the one of the next things. Now, when this goes off 5 years from now, or rather, they start stabilizing in the next 3 to 4, 5 years, climate change is going to hit them. And the population decline will come to the front. And these two are going to ensure that China will decline or continue to decline. You'll say, one knows, what is this climate change? Climate change is going to affect everyone. That will be the popular story. First class. But you see the history of China. Every change in the empire was the result of a famine or a flood. You see the thing which has happened in the in South China, especially along the Yangtze, in the past 2 years. Year before last, they had unprecedented floods. Last year, they had unprecedented drought. And the Yangtze River basin fuels Chinese economy. And climate change is going to have a problem. And what's worse, right? I'll talk of this a little later, in down the line on one of the peaks into, you know, we will talk of climate change and the effect of economy and their infrastructure because it's got all interrelated issues. Now, when you look at it, the current problems will last for 5 years. They'll not allow China to rise. After that, the macro problems of climate change and population decline will set in, and China will continue to decline. And this is not a population decline, it's an overall decline. Right, last but not the least, you'll say, oh, everything can be reversed. This is today's article in South China Morning Post. Getting married is like going to hell. Why more young Chinese are falling out of love with tying the knot? Okay. The second line, social media users say they were put off by the high costs of marriage and increasing difficulty of getting divorced. There's a societal change which is happening. It's nice to talk of China's rise, AI, tech, space, and all that. At the end of the day, the current 1.4 billion Chinese are humans. And they are humanizing. With this, I'll end this episode of A Peek into Everyday China, where I have spoken about the demographic bomb. It's a slow bomb. It's going to burst, not going to let China